That night in Hollow Ridge hung heavy, like a warning no one could quite hear. Fog draped over the hills, swallowing the moonlight and leaving the sky dim and guarded, as if it were protecting a secret of its own. The people of Summit Creek thought it was just another quiet night. But they didn't know that only minutes later, Fire Engine 423, along with the four men whose faces were familiar to every doorstep in town, would charge into the mist and vanish completely. No tracks, no explanation, only a silence so unsettling it made the whole town shiver. 2. On the outer edge of the American Midwest, there's a small town tucked between endless stretches of cornfields. Every morning, church bells ring through the air. The smell of fresh coffee drifts across wooden porches, and life moves just a little slower than it does in the rest of the world. But no matter how peaceful things seem, fires and accidents always find a way to arrive uninvited. And this town relied on a small fire crew, 4 people who looked ordinary at first glance, yet each carried a story you'd never forget. The first was Tom, the captain. He didn't talk much, but his eyes could tell any rookie that responsibility wasn't a slogan, it was a vow. Years ago, Tom lost his closest friend in a major fire, and ever since, he treated the job not just as a duty to save lives, but as a promise he was still keeping with the past. The second was Mark. Always smiling. Always the one to break the tension with simple stories of everyday life. But behind that smile was a heart that had once been shattered when his wife walked away and left him with their 6-year-old daughter. For Mark, every shift was proof that he was still strong enough to hold everything together, even if some nights he quietly stared at his daughter's photo and let out a tired sigh. The third was Lewis, the youngest of the team. He carried the fire and fearlessness of someone in his early 20s, but also the lack of experience that sometimes made the others worry. Lewis joined near midnight as the town sank into a cold veil of fog and the dim streetlights flickered like they were tired after a long day. The fire station was unusually quiet. Tom was reviewing paperwork. Mark was making his 3rd cup of coffee. Lewis was stretched out on the couch, his boots still dusty from training. Sarah was rolling up the last hose. A night that seemed like it would pass without incident. Then the emergency phone rang, a sharp, cutting sound that tore through the sleepy stillness of the room. Tom grabbed it, and the moment the voice on the other end spoke, everyone froze. It was a woman, shaking, breathless, as if she had to steady her own hands just to hold the phone. Her words broke between frantic gasps. "My house is on fire. Please, I don't know if my husband is still inside." Every sentence hit the team like a blow to the chest. Tom glanced at his crew, eyes sharpening, no need for words. Fear and hope were battling inside the woman's trembling voice. You could hear the sob she was trying to hold back. You could feel the desperation of someone standing on the edge of losing everything. Mark set down his coffee, his hands tightening. Sarah stopped what she was doing and took a long, steadying breath, bracing for something bigger than herself. Lewis sat up instantly, eyes wide as if a part of him knew this would be a moment he'd carry forever. Tom asked for the address. The woman answered, her voice cracking apart. Then the line went dead. But the echo of her plea stayed in the room, a ringing, urgent ache that wouldn't allow anyone to move slowly, not even for a second. Within moments, the team launched into motion. Boots hit the floor. Safety straps clicked into place with familiar snaps. The fire engine roared to life, like a beast awakened from sleep. Somewhere in the dark, a small family was living a nightmare. And these 4 people, they were the only hope left in the night. As Fire Engine 423 tore into the night, its red lights swept across the sleeping rooftops of the town. But only a few minutes later, back at the station, Tom noticed something colder than the draft slipping through the old window frame. He wanted to file a report to request backup. But when he opened the communication log, the screen showed nothing but a blank line. No call at 11:41 p.m. No audio, no data, as if the phone had never rung at all. Tom tried again, and again, then a 3rd time. Still nothing. A suffocating silence. He stood still, pen in hand, his heartbeat slowing as if to reassure him he hadn't imagined it. He had heard her voice. He had felt the desperation in it. They all had. But the system said otherwise. In that moment, the small fire station suddenly felt impossibly large, as though every sound had been swallowed by an invisible void. Tom walked slowly toward the duty desk, and that's when he saw it. A handwritten note, slightly tucked under the logbook, as if someone had slid it there in a rush. One short sentence, the handwriting trembling, like someone who'd just been through something they couldn't describe. Help me. They're still inside the house. No address, no name, no explanation for how the note appeared when the entire crew had already left in the truck and no one else had entered the station. Tom picked it up. A faint smell of smoke lingered on the paper, like a trace from somewhere very far or uncomfortably close. A pressure rose in his chest, as if the whole town were whispering something he wasn't ready to understand. Not a warning, but a reminder that sometimes people don't run into the fire because it's their duty. They run because someone out there believes they'll come. Whether that voice is real or not, whether the call ever existed. And on the other side of town, Engine 423 kept driving, carrying 4 people who believed they were on their way to save a family in distress. None of them knew they were about to step into a story the town had tried to bury for years. A story that began with a plea for help. But not everyone can hear it. Near midnight, Route 9 was drowned in a fog so thick the mile markers seemed to disappear into the dark. It was the kind of lonely road long-haul drivers like Bill Harper crossed every week, a man who'd spent nearly 30 years on the highway and who could read the night by the way the air shifted around him. But that night, the air felt heavier, like the foothills of Summit Creek were hiding something they didn't want to give away. Bill said he'd slowed down when he noticed a red light flickering through the fog. At first, he thought it was just a reflection off a road sign. But the glow grew larger, clearer, sharper, until it finally took shape. Fire Engine 423. It shot past his truck at a speed Bill described as faster than usual, as if the crew inside were racing against time or against something he couldn't see. He remembered that moment perfectly. His windows rattled as the fire engine's wake swept over his cab. He checked his side mirror just in time to watch the red lights dissolve into the fog. And within seconds, the truck vanished completely, as though Route 9 simply wasn't long enough to hold its presence. No siren, no engine roar trailing behind it. Nothing but an eerie silence so complete that Bill rolled his window down, just to make sure fatigue wasn't playing tricks on him. But what haunted him most wasn't the silence. It was the brief glimpse he caught of the person in the passenger seat. A look focused, determined, yet filled with a deeply human weight. Worry. Urgency. Fear of something they hadn't yet found words for. Bill swore he'd never seen a firefighter charge into the night with eyes like that. Not like someone responding to a fire. Like someone desperate to reach a voice they believed they had to reach in time. When news broke that the fire engine had disappeared, Bill knew what he saw wasn't a hallucination. It was the last verified sighting of the 4 men from Summit Creek. Somewhere on that fog-choked stretch of road, they were doing what they'd always done, keeping a promise to a desperate voice that needed them. And then they were gone, leaving behind a question the town still cannot answer. When the clock struck 6, the first light of Summit Creek hadn't yet broken through the fog, but the entire town was already swelling with a quiet panic. Wives called again and again, but no one picked up. Children stood at their windows, staring down the road where they always saw their fathers return after each night shift. But that morning, the road was disturbingly empty. In less than an hour, police officers, rescue teams, and volunteers had gathered at Fire Station 42. This wasn't a routine search anymore. It was a vow one shared by an entire community for the 4 men who had charged into danger countless times to save them. A helicopter unit was deployed. K-9 teams were brought in. Roads around Hollow Ridge were blocked off and searched inch by inch. People combed through the area as if they were looking for their own family. Residents said they had never seen anything like it. Along the trail leading into the valley, groups walked single file, their footsteps hushed beneath the crackle of radios and the crunch of dry leaves in the fog. No one spoke much. No one dared voice the worst possibilities. They just walked, calling out the firefighters' names, hoping the forest would echo something back. But the forest stayed silent, A helicopter swept along Route 9, hoping to catch the glint of metal from the fire engine. A tire mark, a shard of glass, anything that confirmed the truck had passed through. But the ground below was only blanketed in white fog and dense black pines, like a curtain hiding its secrets. Even the canine dog, known for never losing a trail, faltered. It circled, unsure, then looked up at its handler, as if to say it didn't know what scent to follow anymore. Smoke, fuel, human sweat, every trace had vanished, clean and absolute, as if it had never existed. By noon, the sun was high, but hope had thinned to a thread. The rescue chief stood in the middle of the road, hands on his hips, eyes scanning the distance, as though searching for a path no map had drawn. He said that in 30 years of work, he had never witnessed a disappearance this clean, this impossible. No brake marks, no skid trails, no debris, not even a footprint. A cold unease started to seep into every whisper in Summit Creek. Because everyone understood something simple: accidents leave evidence. A blown tire, a broken guardrail, a wreck at the bottom of a ravine. But a disappearance that leaves no contact with the world at all, that isn't an accident. It feels like something, or someone, lifted them off the ground and took them away. When the search began to stall, investigators turned back to the only place that might still hold an answer: the dispatch room of the fire station. The place where every call, every GPS ping, every log entry was supposed to be stored automatically, untouched, unaltered, impossible for a human to erase. At least, that was how it had always worked. In theory. Darla Cates, the night shift dispatcher, stood before the console looking like someone who had lost something more precious than she could explain. Her hand trembled slightly as she pointed at the screen, trying to explain to investigators something she herself could barely believe. From 11:38 to 11:43 p.m., every piece of data was gone. Not a system glitch, not an overwrite, not even the faintest trace that it had ever existed. In all her years on night duty, Darla had seen the system freeze, seen the software choke, but she had never seen time itself carved clean out of the logs, as if someone had scooped out 5 minutes and lifted them away in a single breath. Her voice cracked when she spoke about the woman's call. She remembered the crying. She remembered the broken breathing. She remembered the words, "They're still in there." But the system insisted that call had never happened. At that moment, a technician pulled up the GPS trail for engine 423, and what appeared on the screen silenced the entire room. The system showed the truck leaving the station normally, but just minutes later, the route began drifting, bending, veering toward a direction that didn't exist, as if the GPS had been dragged by a false signal, or as if someone had drawn a new map, one only that truck could see. The firefighters of that small town weren't people who believed in the supernatural. They believed in maps, in hard data, in machines that didn't lie. But that exhausted morning, staring at the warped trail leading into a blank patch of land the county maps hadn't marked in decades, every person in that room felt a chill creep down their spine. One of the older technicians muttered quietly, and no one disagreed. If someone tampered with this system, they knew this station inside and out, or they knew exactly where they wanted that truck to go. And in that moment, the grief of families waiting for news began to merge with something else. A growing understanding that the 4 men had not simply strayed off the road. They had been led away by a call that didn't exist, by a route that shouldn't exist, by a hidden hand behind the curtain of fog. That afternoon, as the sun began dipping toward the horizon, the search teams pushed deeper into the area locals still called Hollow Ridge. It was a place no longer marked on official maps, yet families in Summit Creek spoke of it with a kind of careful hesitation, like mentioning a forgotten corner of the forest better left alone. The old pines rose so high their branches formed a thick canopy, letting only thin, pale ribbons of light fall through. The air there always carried a damp, cold scent, as if it had been guarding its own secrets for generations. Barely a few minutes into the trees, one of the volunteers shouted, his voice sharp with confusion. Ahead of them lay a scorched circle of earth. Too large to be a campfire. Too small to be a wildfire. The ground was black, dry, and looked as if something had burned hot enough to ignite it, then vanished instantly. What froze everyone in place was the absence of everything fire should leave behind. No ash, no half-burned branches, no debris, just a clean, precise ring of charred soil, sitting in the middle of the forest like a strange surgical cut. A rescue worker knelt and touched the ground only to jerk his hand back. It was still warm, hours after whatever caused it had happened. A nervous chill ran through the entire group. People who had fought hundreds of fires understood one thing. Fire always tells its story. It leaves evidence, patterns, scars. But here, it was as if the fire had obeyed a command: burn exactly where it wanted, then withdraw without leaving a trace. A few yards from the burn mark lay something even more unsettling. Footprints, clear, sharp, unmistakable. 4 sets, all matching the size and sole pattern of the missing firefighters. They had walked in a line, steady and straight, every step leading toward the dark pines ahead. But the most disturbing part, all footprints ended abruptly. No turning, no widening of stride, no sign of anyone running, stumbling, or changing direction. The prints simply stopped, as if 4 men had walked to that exact spot and then vanished into the air. An older woman on the team covered her mouth, her voice shaking, as she whispered that she'd seen footprints from lost hikers, injured hunters, even panicked runaways, but never anything that ended with such unnatural precision. Another rescuer squinted into the shadowed branches beyond, searching for any movement, any hint of a figure. But the wind only brushed through the trees, carrying the scent of pine resin and a heavy silence. A silence that made everyone there feel as though the forest was watching them back. Something had happened to the 4 firefighters. Something that held them right there. In the impossible burn mark, in the halted footsteps, in a place where the world itself felt altered. And slowly, everyone began to understand. They weren't just searching for missing men anymore. They were following the trail of a mystery that had been waiting a very long time to be found. When the search team found the spot where the footprints suddenly stopped, it was as if the entire town of Summit Creek was pulled backward into the stories they'd spent years trying to forget. Hollow Ridge had always existed at the edge of the town's memory, like a page no one wanted to reopen. Not because they didn't believe the stories, but because they believed them a little too much. And in the mountains, belief always came with caution, shaped by generations who understood that nature had its own way of giving warnings. Humans were never meant to fully understand. The oldest resident in town, Ray Mallon, used to say Hollow Ridge had never truly belonged to Summit Creek. It was land that stood just outside the boundary, unwilling to be claimed. He recalled that decades ago, hunting camps had vanished from that area without a trace. No bears, no wildfires. People simply went to sleep, and by morning the campsite was quiet. So quiet, it felt as if the whole place had been lifted away during the night. Hollow Ridge Road, once a busy trail, had been abandoned after too many accidents no one could explain. Cars slid off the road even when the pavement was dry. Compasses spun like they'd lost their minds. Emergency calls never reached anyone. Locals said Hollow Ridge wasn't welcoming to strangers. Not a demon, not a ghost, just something not entirely part of the world they understood. Something like the mountain's breath. A cold presence standing just behind your shoulder, especially when the fog rolled in. Some claimed they had seen a flicker of red light moving between the trees at night. Others swore they heard footsteps running through the darkness, only to find nothing when they turned around. Those old tales had once been nothing more than murmurs over dinner tables or whispered during Sunday gatherings behind the church. Stories kept alive by vague fears and the slow passing of time in a small mountain town. But when 4 firefighters vanished on that same patch of land, the whispers were no longer just stories. They became pieces of a truth no one wanted to face but could no longer turn away from. During the town hall meeting, a woman stood up. Her voice trembled, her eyes red, as if she'd been crying. She said her father had forbidden her from going anywhere near Hollow Ridge because there were places that didn't want to be understood. He always told her that some things were so old, people had no business touching them, and if they did, the mountain would take back what was disturbed in its own way. Those stories didn't help the search effort, but they made the silence around Hollow Ridge heavier, and they forced everyone to realize that those 4 men hadn't just walked into a forest that night. They had stepped into a darkness that had been there long before any of them were born. When every official source fell silent, when every physical clue ended abruptly on the slopes of Hollow Ridge, people began turning to theories. And strangely enough, the deeper they analyzed, the further the story slipped into something else. Something darker, colder, and far more unsettling. The first theory was an accident. On the surface, it made sense. A cold night, fog thick enough to smother the glow of any camera. Route 9 twisting through the mountains like it wanted to swallow whoever passed through. But if it was an accident, why were there no skid marks, no debris, no shattered glass? Nothing to prove a collision ever happened. An accident that left behind absolute silence. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt like an erasure. The second theory involved a system hack. A cold, precise hand manipulating the GPS. Someone skilled enough to wipe logs without leaving a shadow. Bold enough to redirect the truck into a part of the ridge no one ever set foot in after dark. But to do that, someone would have needed knowledge. Deep, specific knowledge. And a reason. A reason to push all of them into danger. No one knew the motive. But the idea lingered like a chill in the room. A mind orchestrating everything. A mind that never wanted to be seen. The final theory. Time distortion. It sounded like something out of a novel. Yet, everyone knew Hollow Ridge never played by ordinary rules. Locals claimed that on certain nights, light behaved strangely. Sounds vanished into thin air. Time slipped. Just a fraction, like a single beat falling out of rhythm. And if time could bend even by 1 second, what would happen to a truck that stopped right at the intersection of those distortions? No one dared answer. But the thought alone was enough to chill anyone to the bone. 3 theories, 3 different endings. But all of them shared one thing in common. None of them explained everything. And none of them could tell us what truly happened inside that truck on that cold, silent night. When the case finally closed and the last warning light faded out, all we were left with was an empty space. No clear answers. No neat ending. Only the silence of Route 9 and the echo of a night where 2 men vanished as if they had never passed through it all. But there was one thing everyone understood. Whatever happened in Hollow Ridge, they were there because of the job they believed in. Because of the responsibility they carried every single day. A job the world remembers only when flames roar, but forgets the moment the smoke clears. A job often praised on the news, yet rarely seen for what it truly costs. Behind every turnout coat is a human being, someone with a family waiting at home, a half-finished dinner left on the table, quiet worries they never talk about. Being a firefighter isn't just running into burning buildings. It's accepting that any moment could be the last. It's choosing to protect strangers they may never meet. It's placing their hearts in the very places everyone else is running from. And that is why, when we heard about the 2 men missing that night, we didn't just see a mystery. We saw sacrifice. We may never know what truly happened on Hollow Ridge, but one truth remains unchanged. This world keeps turning because there are people willing to stand in the most dangerous places so others don't have to. And sometimes the best way to honor them is to remember that they were never superheroes. They were human. Human and braver than most of us will ever be. Keep them in your thoughts. Cherish the ones who do the kind of work not everyone has the courage to shoulder. And the next time you hear a siren cutting through the night, remember this. Somewhere out there, someone is running toward danger, with everything they've got, for someone they've never met.